Hello, I'm Brett Knowles from PM Squared. This is a recap of the Unstoppable Planning Tour conversation I'll be leading on Agile Planning. So, what is Agile Planning? Well, if I take the Wikipedia definition for Agile and adapt it for planning, it sounds like it's about a group of planning methods which allow collaboration between cross-functional teams such as finance, operations, and sales. It allows for adaptive planning, evolutionary development, and continuous improvement of the developing process. And what it gives us is rapid and flexible response to change. So, phrased another way, it's increasing our plan's ability to react to changes over the year by doing four things. 1. Reducing the amount of time it takes us to cut a plan. 2. Increasing the predictive capability or accuracy of that plan. 3. Improving the execution ratio, the ability of us to get that plan done. And 4. Reducing the reaction time between when the plan informs us of a gap and our ability to take action on it. So let's talk about mechanically what that looks like. Traditionally, the planning process in organizations is a bit like this. We start off with our strategic plan, and that feeds some sort of financial plan, budget, forecasting process. And as a result of that, we feed it down to a series of silos. We work it through the account planning, demand forecasting, sales planning, and all the other things. What's important to your organization, workforce planning, distribution, logistics, retail network, and so forth. And there's sort of this top-down campaign where we'll get the strategy plan to inform the financial plan. The financial plan then informs what we do in each of these different silos. And those silos react to that overall direction and then give some feedback back up. In fact, this process iterates back and forth. And for most organizations, on average, it takes about 18 weeks of iterations back and forth that lay down the plan. A fairly ineffective process if you look at it this way. So what does Agile do for us? It gives us an alternative. What if we could take that strategy and the forecasting and make it sort of the center of the hub? And then after that, around that, a series of spokes. And each of these spokes represent part of the planning process. So for example, if market and account planning is important to you, let's go and make that two of those spokes. So now if we change knowledge about the market, it iterates back to the forecast and plans and also impacts account planning. Likewise, for demand, supply, sales planning, and workforce, etc. So the idea now is it's not a series of silos disconnected by organization charts, software systems, time, location. It now becomes one integrated plan. So what that allows us to do is a series of things. What it means is if any element were to change at any point in time, in any sequence, it integrates across the plan virtually instantly. So now as we update market expectations, understanding, or production issues, workforce constraints, and so on, the rest of the plan immediately knows that, and we're not waiting for these spreadsheets to fly back and forth. So what's it look like in a comparison? Well, if we take a look at Agile versus traditional planning, 5 different dimensions. First off, their ability to change. So if we take a look across time, what we find with the ability to change the plan, in the traditional planning, you have infinite ability to change it at the beginning. But as I begin to get it down to different silos, my opportunity to shift it reduces over time because we're gradually building in constraints and plan objects. In Agile planning, it remains flexible for virtually the whole time. So once we make that initial strategy forecasting statement, we can quickly iterate it back and forth, and therefore we remain very agile. We have the ability to change it. Let's take a look at the visibility of the plan. Now, in the traditional planning world, what ends up happening is it's fairly visible at the beginning, but then as you fire it down to the silos, you've lost sight of it. And it's not till it bounces back up you begin to see it again. Whereas in the Agile world, because we're iterating it back and forth across that hub and spoke model, we continue to have visibility across time. Now let's take a look at the business value. Now, traditionally, we don't get much value from the plan until it's complete. So we do all this effort but get no benefit. If the planning process fell apart here, we'd know nothing more about the plan than we did at the beginning. In the Agile process, it's quite the opposite. As soon as it gets released from the finance step, immediately we begin getting great value and the iterations become slower over time. So what does that do to risk? Well, obviously, you have a high risk footprint with the traditional planning process all the way through until the final iterations are done. Whereas the risk drops quickly in the Agile world because of our ability to iterate it and react to any changes over time. So business value and risk are important components. Let's take a look if we combine those. In the Agile world, we should be able to see the business value increases quickly and risk decreases quickly. And the benefit of that is obviously the perfect model for the senior leadership team. Overall, what does this do for us? Benefits that have been reported from our assessments include a 61% lower cost to cut the plan, a 93% less errors in the plan, 39% less staff consumed in making the plan, and therefore a 24% faster process overall. So that's what Agile planning is and what the benefits are. Let's now talk about what are the 5 best practices that we're going to be covering today. What we've done is we've researched across our client base and external research to identify the 5 powerful things you could do right away in any sequence to begin delivering value to your planning process and move you towards this Agile world. So no particular sequence. 1 is eliminate those spreadsheets. 2, simplify your planning model from the complex multiple driver one to something that's more manageable. Eliminate the idle time between the steps and those iterations back and forth. Learn to focus on the key drivers, the things that are variable in your model and that matter to your business. And 5, monitor and react. 80% of strategies fail not because they're not correct, but because they're not executed. The broken part is making sure that we're actually monitoring our ability to execute that strategy and that plan and react to it quickly. So let's take a look at the first. Eliminate spreadsheets. So there are 4 common problems that we see in virtually all the spreadsheets that we deal with in planning environments. And these problems are simple things that you've seen yourself. Things like the broken telephone, right? We have a planning number and it goes into the planning black box and out comes a different number. Well, what the heck happened? Problem number 2, we have an unknown source. So we have a number that pops out is 4111, but where the heck did it come from? And was it a valid source? Is it auditable and accurate? An incorrect formula. We may be able to see mathematically there's a mistake in the spreadsheets, and we'll come back to that later. 4, a loss of fidelity, or what we think of as dimensionality. So perhaps we're collecting information, sales by region, by rep, by product, by period. The dilemma is, by the time it comes to the black box, we only have one of those dimensions, sales by rep. And so if we try to do anything else with the plan, we lose it. And then, of course, the 5th option is we combine these mistakes. So let's say we combine problems 1 and 4, broken telephone and loss of fidelity. And if we then add up sales by rep, we end up with one number. But if we add up by a different dimension, let's say sales by product, we end up with a completely different number. And of course, sales should be sales. These 2 numbers should equal. And so this is what drives us crazy as planners. Where does that problem come from? Obviously, it's born in the spreadsheets, and therefore our first statement of agility is get rid of those spreadsheets. I mean, we've done a lot of research, and here's what we know. If we take a look at the error rate in planning-related spreadsheets, it's over 90%. Over 90% of the spreadsheets have at least one error. And some may be insignificant, but 50% of the errors are material. The second thing we've observed is that 61% of CFOs are frustrated by the amount of time and complexity it takes to check on those plan numbers and resolve those broken telephones and formula issues and so forth. And the third important data point research tells us is that over 33% of businesses report that they've actually made bad decisions based on those spreadsheet errors. In fact, 20% of those have resulted in a direct financial loss. That's a significant cost to the spreadsheet problem. So let's go back to that model we saw before about traditional planning. Well, if we take a look at the client base and the average organization, what we know is about 29% of organizations have between 2 and 5 different systems that feed their planning process. 23% have between 6 and 10, and 20% have 11 or more. What does this mean? It means that a full 72% of organizations are trying to plow multiple systems through the planning process. How do we do that? We all know the answer. We use spreadsheets. So we convert the strategic plan in that system into a spreadsheet of numbers. Then we convert that into a spreadsheet of numbers around the top level financial plans and budgets. Then each of the different silos use a spreadsheet to feed back what their aspect of the plan is. But as we described before, these are done in isolation, and that back and forth doesn't get reconciled until it goes back up to the top. It reminds me of that old story about the 8 blind people and the elephant. Each of these plans works by itself and doesn't understand how it links into the rest of the organization. That old model about the 8 blind people and the elephant is this. Basically, depending on which part of the elephant you hang on to, you think it's going to be something different. Well, that's the same thing with our planning process. Depending on which part of this model you're looking at, you think that the overall entity is going to be something different. And that's why we end up with these hugely long planning processes that result in very ineffective plans. Well, there's another way that we can solve this problem. But to exasperate it, this back and forth process we talked about continually accentuates those mathematical errors and mistakes we have inside the spreadsheets. So what if we did something different? What if we took those and we built those in that model we saw before, the hub and spoke? So what that allows us to do is to eliminate those spreadsheets. Now, we can actually eliminate them in any sequence. So depending where we have the biggest weakness or the biggest opportunity, we'll build those into the model first. So that's how we begin eliminating them. We just knock them off where the biggest opportunity is. Now, to make life easier for us, if we were to put this out there in the cloud, what it means is as we get rid of each spreadsheet, now the collective wisdom that we had from that spreadsheet is available to everyone. So what that allows us to do is not only remove once and have it forever gone, but more importantly, we can effectively crowdsource the data. So as anyone in your organization learns something about a part of the model, they can contribute it to that cloud-based model. And what this allows us to do is everyone in the community contributes what they know and gradually build up a much more robust model. In many cases, we go to organizations where there are 27 spreadsheets that get sent out by product. The dilemma is only 10 of those we have a robust enough data to fill in, and the rest we just use plug datas or end up blank. In this way, even if we know a little bit about each one of those product groups, we can begin building it in. And as the community of practice grows, we begin to grow the overall knowledge set. So eliminating spreadsheet can be done in any sequence at any time and allows us to knock off the big opportunities. Let's move on to the second Agile opportunity. It's about simplifying the planning model. What we've learned is many times we have multiple drivers to make up for those silos. I plan my area with more robustness so I can effectively fortify my answer against onslaughts from the other departments. Well, what if we went back to this idea of integrating them? So let's take a look at what some of our research tells us. First off, if we take a look at the failure rate of drivers over the number of drivers, as you begin adding more and more drivers to the model, the failure rate increases. In fact, what's also interesting is the marginal utility of the next driver increases and then eventually decreases. These drivers here conflict with some of the earlier drivers, and it sends us into a tailspin where the model begins undoing itself. Now, What are the consequences of this? Well, it means that the budgeting process takes too much time and costs us too much money as we add this unnecessary complexity. On average, it takes 4 months to cut a plan and about 20 or 30% of your senior executive's time. Well, there's many other places they could be adding far greater value. The Hackett Group found, for example, that organizations over $1 billion spend about 25,000 person hours per $1 billion of revenue. What that equates to, if you figure about the average cost of a person fully accrued, it's about $1,000 cost per $1 million of revenue, an exorbitant cost. What we should obviously do is just focus where we have great value on the few drivers that have incremental value to our overall business. I'll give you an example. We had one client where we entered the environment. They had about 17,500 drivers to support 350 locations globally. By the time we're done, we identified 27 common drivers we could use across all lines of business, across all locations. And we decided to try to quantify the benefits of this. And so we determined 4 success dimensions. The criteria 1 was pervasiveness, right? How good was the forecast versus the old model? 2, predictability. What was the accuracy of this simplified 27 driver model compared to what actually occurred? Because you have the benefit of looking at, in hindsight, what really happened. The impact. What is our ability to take action on any variances we observed? Because if we have a variance but don't know where it comes from, it's of not much value. And then finally, agility, the organization's ability to react to the observed variances. And overall, we found a score of 82%. In other words, with 27 drivers, we could hit about an 82% accuracy rate against the initial model. But obviously, this, which took 4 months, could now be done in 4 minutes on your cell phone. So the simplification creates huge agility. It allows scenario planning, leadership to a whole bunch of stuff. So how do we do that? Well, if we go back to our model where, again, we've got a certain number of planning elements. In this case, we haven't built out the full hub and spoke model. This is early in the game and what it looked like. And so they came up with a strategy that talked about introducing new products. And that was going to be our core strategy for the next year. Well, the new products had to do with strategy, products, and revenue. So we can actually multiply those things together and look at the strategic impact that comes from revenue we expect to get from new products. So think of this as strategic dollars or strategic points. Now, if we take another one, let's say revenue from existing products, it's going to have a lower impact because, of course, there's a lower strategic focus on revenue from existing products. So think of this as you're migrating from manufacturing buggy whips to making cars. So we can begin modeling this out in this integrated way because we have strategy at the center of the planning function. So how do we do this inside of Anaplan? Well, we can now begin to quantify and then graph, as you've seen, these different elements and understand the incremental benefit of each driver. And we can understand that in the context of the driver's strategic impact and the number of drivers involved. So obviously now we can cull the drivers. We'll take a look at the few drivers, Pareto's law. 20% of the drivers drive 80% of the model. So let's just focus on those. And now we've simplified the model. Again, you can only do this when you bring strategy in as a component of the planning process. Okay, let's move on to the 4th step. We now need to eliminate idle time. Now, eliminating idle time is remarkably easy. Remember here's a quick quiz. Think of, baseball. Guess how much time when you watch a baseball game, the ball is actually in play. And here's a hint. The game goes on for, on average, 2 hours. The ball's in play for 6 minutes. If you divide 6 by 120, that's a pretty low ratio of stuff actually going on. That's called the value-added ratio. 6 divided by 2 hours, or 6 divided by 120. Okay, maybe you're a football fan. What's your guess about football? Well, the game's 3 hours, the ball's in play for 11 minutes. Same thing. 11 divided by 180 is an awfully small ratio. Well, now take a look at your planning process. Remember those spreadsheets, those iterations back and forth? Well, Michael Hammer in his research in re-engineering the organization says that average process, like this one, has about a 3% value added. In other words, across those 4 months, only about 3% of the time is actually used in a value-added context for building a plan. So back to our model. In Anaplan, when we can put this in the cloud, what it allows us to do is any changes we make get iterated immediately and known by the whole community of practice so that we can all impact and affect our models accordingly. So, removing our idle time and moving towards Agile spins off a bunch of benefits. Things like, 60% of the plans are accurate within 5% of the original assumptions. 62% are more likely to, organizations are more likely to complete a budget with fewer than 2 iterations. We have about 150% higher likelihood of making real-time data available because of the agility and the simplification that we've put in place. We've reduced cycle times by 70%. We've reduced the staff effort, and we've also been able to improve the forecast reliability. These are all benefits that offer both plan integrity benefits and bottom line cost benefits to simplifying and reducing the cost of the planning process. Now, we need to focus on the elements which matter as the 4th element of moving towards Agile. And, again, a snap quiz. So most organizations have different centers of gravity or focuses. Some organizations are, sales focused. Others have an operations focus. Some are about people, customer service, innovation. What's yours? And if, an example is, think of Apple. Apple obviously has a strong innovation center, strong sales center. So it's going to be a bit like Florida. You get 2 votes. What's your organization? And the idea is once you pick out what your organization is, I need to build out more detail just for that area. Just because I'm innovation centric, as our example with Apple, doesn't mean they need to do as extensive operations planning as an organization like Boeing or Ford might need to. You need to put the focus where your strategic focus is in your business. Now, the good news is, in the Anaplan world, there's an app for that. So there are apps which have been built for specialized functions that allow you to get access to what experts have developed around each of their areas of expertise and the specific model elements that you need if that's your center of gravity. So focus on what matters, whether that's human capital planning, Salesforce planning, commissioning planning, etc. So the 5th best practice that you can implement immediately is about monitoring and reacting to your ability to execute that plan. Now, we're used to this stuff already. We should be able to spit out variances against the actual plan and be able to drill through whether it's a dimension issue of product, regionality, revenue, and so forth, and with our inquiring mind begin to understand which part of the model has become disconnected. But typically, this is only looking inside the cut plan model. And what I said earlier on, our early research at Harvard told us that 80% of strategies fail, not because they're not good, but because they're not executed. So this analysis has to include the strategy and understand what that gap looks like. And again, because we have this hub and spoke model where strategy is at the center, we can begin to take a look at that. So remember this model we saw before where we look at the margin utility of each of those drivers based on the strategic priority? Well, what if we now take a look at the actuals? So, what were those strategic priorities by, in this case, strategic objective? What did the forecast priorities tell us? And what's actually occurring? And therefore, what are the actual priorities? In this example, you can see that this particular strategic goal didn't have that much of a priority when we cut the plan. Unfortunately, it got lost in translation. The forecast in this example showed that that same objective had a huge amount of focus. So all of a sudden, the plans are trying to execute on something that we didn't have in mind. Using the previous example, that would be saying this is revenue from existing products, which is supposed to be unimportant, yet the forecast says it's important. And then it gets lost in translation one more time. when we take a look at the actual variances, so what is the actual strategic dollars earned compared to either the forecast or the original strategy, we can see that we now have three different answers. So by linking strategy into the dollars and begin to add in that prioritization, we can find out what part of the modeling process is broken. In this case, working harder on our actuals or even our forecast is not going to help us. The problem is back here at the execution of strategy stage. What we can also do is drill into any one of these objectives and do the same analysis by dimension, whether that's by channel, product, sales rep, region, whatever you want to, and to begin to understand which part of the modeling process is broken so we focus on that area. So this is all part of that monitor and feedback so we can begin to get better alignment between strategy and execution. And at the end of the day, you'll earn way more money by tightening up that execution capability than being 3 cents more accurate on your costing model, as an example. So let me just wrap up what we've talked about in this last little while. Agile is all about increasing the plan's ability to react to changes. And you're going to do that by reducing the time to plan, improving the predictive capability of the plan, improving our ability to execute and the execution ratio, and finally improving our reaction time to changes in the plan. What we learned is there's 5 best practices. Things like eliminating the spreadsheets, simplifying your planning model, eliminating the idle time between the steps, focusing in on the element of your plan that matters, and monitoring and reacting to that gap between strategy and execution. What we also talked about is that you can do these things in any sequence when you use a tool like Anaplan. You can do it at any pace that you want to do it at. You can either eliminate all the spreadsheets at once, knock off the important ones, and do the rest later. It also means that this project can self-fund with the significant reductions in time and cost, but also the improvement in planning accuracy and your ability to perform better. And finally, you can start simple and radiate from there. So I want to thank you for your time. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'll look forward to when we can be together and discuss these best practices in more detail.